Valcrest, outside of New Haven. Now then, come to me, Wallen. But, sir, that's an order. The spirit-tipped raised up in response. Though it gleamed brilliant in the day's lazy sun, it also teetered, unbalanced, in the hands of its owner. Quiet contempt emerged from beyond, the eyes that peered eager onto a small arena, the wind gently blowing through the blades of grass beneath their feet. Every jaw set in anticipation, waiting eagerly for the show to begin. Then the spear moved with stern hands to guide it. Feet pounded the earth in repetition, charging forward with a hoarse cry. The flash of a determined face taking to stance, bearing down on metal and flesh. The onlookers were lit with pride and joy at the last action, at last amusement. Their voices cried out in jubilation. They are brethren, the legion against the few. Wallen's face twisted in pain, and his spear spilled earthward, rolling far from his desperate grip. Body weakened, pain overridden, all instinct, the man buckled, kneeling, unwilling, and spitting bitterness between clenched teeth. Over him a monument of metal, a man, a behemoth, its mighty hand clasping Wallen by the shoulder firmly. Rise, salamander, you are better than this. Wallen's hand took the warlord by the gauntlet, pulling himself to a stance, but still retching from the blow to his abdomen. The crowd had grown hushed, and returned their attention to their comrades. Some considered their fortunes, and others their fears. Much could be said for the salamander's training regiment. The foremost thought usually about how painful it tended to be. Why did you hesitate? I was afraid. You were uncertain of what could happen. Yes, sir. The unknown can kill you. Fear will kill you. You never know what you're going to face on the battlefield. Even the most meager-looking opponent could in fact be anything. We live in a world where anyone could be capable of everything. But we do not show them weakness. We are... Where is Haymond? The knight crossed his arms, embittered by his sudden revelation. Eagerly he overlooked the crowd of men standing at attention, scanning carefully and counting carefully to himself, taking account for equipment and those running about with private chores. Continue sparring. I want to see the grass red by the time I return. With instructions promptly left, the warlord turned briskly and marched toward the forest. They had been moving about the great woods of Valcrest, careful to stay far from the wolves or any larger groups of mercenaries that might cause trouble. They stayed nomadic to avoid conflict, and while going about undetected was impossible, they had no complications thus far. For that, Grim was thankful. Laughter flitted from the boughs, and leaves danced to their delight. Such bittersweet words were exchanged in hushed, haughty whispers. Minds that were set apart now find themselves merged in a singular desire, though perhaps not the same need. It was belonged to the oldest of known wants, a man and woman alone in their thoughts. His chortle could be picked up quite keenly as it reverberated through the woods, his green garments being adjusted properly after a foot chase. Playing games with the distorted woman he followed, he was a poor choice given that his legs had a tendency to falter under duress. Too many days were spent harshly training, and his feet just couldn't take much more. His eyes were bound with medical bandages, and his company was generous enough to lead him by voice, singing of sultry promises and drawing the stumbling fool even deeper into the woods. A caress from her hands, a musing from her lips, and the man bumbled like a child lost in an innocent fantasy. One could imagine his tension once they had found a retreat in which to rest. Sitting with his back to the trunk of a mighty tree, he spewed promises and beautiful nothings. A tongue surprisingly poetic returned his remarks and readied herself for the much-anticipated thrill. "My darling, I will love you eternal," the man would chime. "Oh yes, you will be mine forever," came the response. The poor fool, blinded from more than just his sight. If he had only known, if he could only see the glimmer of the knife slipping free of her boot, its edge poised to his flesh, her smile drowning any doubt as to her wish. Eyes of gold that spilled the lights of destruction from the power was hers. This man, this soul. She had the control to take or give life. Giggling forced up through the throat dribbled past hungry lips. The choice was made. I want to show you my world, Haymond. Would you like to feel what I feel? Beg, my pet. The blade leapt forward and slipped perfectly into a hand of steel. Her own stopped short as it slid against the edges of cold, unfeeling metal, the orbs beaming up to witness the disapproving gaze of her would-be commander. Haymond, if you want to live to see tomorrow, I suggest you stay away from this one. Take off that stupid blindfold and drag your sorry self back to camp. The startled soldier hopped immediately to his feet and ripped the cloth from his eyes. There was no time to question the scene as he broke into a dead run back toward the rest of the salamanders. Compelled by a much stronger instinct than even lust could provide, Grim watched with little interest while his recruit fled to safety. Once he was assured the lead had gone, he returned his focus to the young woman he had stopped. His grip tightened in reaction. Though it was pointless, she didn't feel it. "Hello, Grim. Come to ruin my party? I think we should start seeing other people. It's getting dull trying to stab you all the time. Killing recruits is rather counterproductive to my plans. As I recall, you swore your allegiance to me." I don't remember, but I love it when you talk business." "Morgan." Fine, fine. I won't kill your precious sweaty green men." The blade released her after knowing that there was no guarantee she'd follow through. For now it satisfied his nerves. Should it continue to be a problem, he wasn't sure to what lengths he'd have to go. She was far too dangerous to allow free rein over his camp. He'd run out of men before anyone knew what was going on. The sole duty of seeing to her deeds was left to the warlord. Morgan dusted herself off casually, still chipper and humming to herself while pretending to see Grim off, her sight darting here and there, examining things she could hunt to occupy her time. The boredom was becoming unbearable around these parts. Staying busy for her usually meant angering someone or taunting some poor fool. "Grimmy, don't be that way. Don't be angry with me. Oh, that reminds me. How is your little herb working? Is it curing that temper of yours?" The ex-knight didn't bother with a response. He had familiarized himself with her games. Of course, in retrospect, they weren't difficult. She would say or do anything to get under one's skin. "No? What a shame. Looks like you and I are going to have our little duel to the death after all. I can hardly wait. I always wanted another chance to kill you myself." The desert. Allison had stayed in the training area even after Chris ran off. Dashton had walked up to her, scratching his head in confusion. What was that all about? "I don't know," Allie shrugged in response. "Maybe there are too many people here at once." "She told me she could handle it," Dashton responded. "I think maybe you should go see Chris." "Hey, wait up!" Dashton shouted over Allie's shoulder. Allie turned to see Chris walking a straight line towards the temple, ignoring people as they addressed her. "The hell?" Allie mumbled, confused. Before she had the chance to follow Chris, though, a young mercenary came running towards them and stopped before Dashton, attempting to give him a message despite his shortness of breath. "Shakai, sir, we have travelers coming the south. Foreigners, it seems. Adrani is leading them into camp now." Dashton chuckled. "Oh my, outsiders. What a joyous occasion. I must welcome them to our delightful home," he stated cheerfully, walking towards a training dummy, where he had hung the crimson-red cape, wrapping it carelessly around his shoulders as he walked back towards the encampment. Allison stood there for a moment, torn between her concern with Chris and the overwhelming curiosity towards these outsiders Dashton had so excitedly referred to. After a few moments of indecision, she ended up being dragged by Jackson. "Come now, Blondie. You're not going to want to miss this," the man stated, putting one arm around her shoulders and leading her towards the people that had gathered to get a good look at the travelers. For what she could hear of the whispers, it was a rather odd group. Once they were close enough to get a good look, she heard Jackson mumble something along the lines of, "Never thought I'd see one." She didn't bother to ask what that meant exactly. Her eyes were fixed on the man who seemed to be leading the group. There was something about him, she wasn't yet sure what, that made him seem all too familiar. Which was an odd feeling, since she couldn't really see the man's face, and it was clear to her that she had never met him before. He reminded her of someone she knew. That's probably what it was. Dacian walked amongst his men in order to reach the center of the crowd of people who had gathered in the center of the encampment. He examined the approaching group with curious eyes, his gaze lingering a little longer on the female member of the party than it would be considered polite. Andrani immediately stopped beside him and explained what had happened at the gates. However, he didn't react to her words, and turned his attention to the man who seemed to be the leader as he spoke. "I suppose you're the leader of this fine company of men and women? I have many things to discuss with you if you are willing to listen," the leader said and bowed. 2 others of the group bowed as well, which caused Dacian's attention to momentarily fall on the one who hadn't, ever-growing curiosity in his eyes. The proud men and women of Brightvale hadn't left Valcrest in centuries, but when it came to stories, they had more than enough to spare, and Dacian knew them all. He knew that the Outer Lands had probably changed greatly since his clan's last account of them, and whatever these strangers had to tell, he surely wanted to hear it. However, first things first. "All right now, friend. No need to be so damn respectful to a bunch of disorderly drunks like us. Now, it's true that we do have some very fine men and women that you'll ever meet, that's for sure. I could even recommend a few of you if you're ever in need," he said playfully, winking to a nearby woman, causing her to giggle. "And it wouldn't be incorrect to assume that if I order them, they'll obey," he chuckled. "Or at the very least, I hope they won't laugh at me. Still, I'm not one for formalities. I'd much rather talk things over with a bottle of booze, or some tea if you'd rather," he smiled brightly. "I'm sure you're all in need of a good meal and something to drink. Am I right?" Assassin's Camp. Sean listened to Avius with a slight frown crossing his expression. It's not like he hadn't thought of all that before, but what good did it do? There was no way to even guess whether the war would restart any time this century, or which side was the strongest. New Haven was filled with bureaucrats and idealistic fools, while the new king of Blackpond seemed to not really give a crap, even for his own city, even less their rival. It was just an incomprehensible mess, that's all that it was. "I see your point, friend. But as it is hard to know who we could even side with. New Haven is filled with idealistic bullshit, and thus they will most likely never truly aim to massacre Blackpond. Otherwise, they would do it now, when they are weakened. Blackpond is just, well, unreliable, and that, to say the very least. This new king of theirs has me worried. He really does." He stood up and stretched with a small groan. "I know we must eventually take a position and do something, but I wouldn't like to rush into a situation I don't fully comprehend, or ally with someone I know nothing about. There are moments to stand down and moments to act," he stated seriously. "Our moment will come soon. Don't worry." As he prepared to slowly walk back to the encampment, he could hear shouting coming from the direction he was headed. "Shit! What now?" he muttered, running back towards the center of camp, only to catch the scene of Desmond, lying dead on the ground with a knife buried on the top of his head. He looked around to see one of the actives sitting on the ground holding his head with a painful expression, broken glass on the floor around him. Sean walked past Desmond's body and crouched down before the man. "Eric, is it?" "Yes, sir," the man mumbled. "Explain something to me." He started picking up one of the biggest shards of glass off the floor and bringing it close to his face, the smell of alcohol confirming that the idiot was in fact drinking inside campgrounds. "How is it possible that Evan Bana infiltrated this camp again, and no one was able to stop him?" "He was in disguise," the man replied. "In disguise. I see." He waved the shard of glass in front of the man's eyes. "That, and you were all having a party when you were supposed to be alert. I should make you second in command, and let you suffer the consequences of the stupidity that seems to be spreading around this encampment lately. Would you like that?" No, sir." "No? All right, then." He stood up straight. "Evan Bana is a dangerous man. I don't care what kind of idiotic rumors you've heard, there's no excuses to get sloppy. I don't want to see this sort of crap in my camp again. If someone looks funny, attack. If someone acts different, attack. If something moves on its own, attack it repeatedly. But this, he pointed at Desmond. I will have no more of this. He tossed the glass jar down Eric. And I swear, by all the guards, if I catch anyone even thinking of alcohol again, so help me, I will. Sean! Sean! A panicked voice sounded behind him. Caitlin! He said he poisoned her. Sean didn't respond or stop to think about it. He simply addressed Avius, not looking to see where the man was standing. Deal with these idiots for me. With that said, he turned and ran towards the place he knew Katie would be, his father's workshop. He opened the door to find the girl lying on the ground floor. Two actives had followed him in and were now standing in the doorway behind him as he knelt down to check her pulse. Her heart was beating faintly and she was grasping for air. There's an antidote kit on the second desk drawer, he said, pointing to a heavy wooden desk in the corner. One of the men reached in and opened the drawer, taking a black box from it and handing it over to Sheen. He opened the box and ran his hand through the vials contained there until he picked one out and forced the girl to drink. She began coughing immediately after swallowing the medicine, but it seemed to have worked, at least for the moment. Why? The girl muttered out, coughing. Sheen simply nodded in response. Just tell me how you feel. My chest aches, she mumbled. You'll be all right. Just take deep breaths and hold very still, okay? The girl nodded in agreement, and Sean addressed the other men in the room. His voice was as calm as could be. Gather a group of 5 to take my sister to the healers, and spread the word. Crimson Shadows, from now on, are to be killed on sight. No more warnings, no more sending bodies back for burial, no more. If they're not willing to turn the traitors in, they'll die with them. Before the men left to pass the orders along, Sean spoke again. You, he pointed to one of the men. Stay here with her. He then leaned forward and kissed his sister's forehead. I'm sorry, Katie. I know this isn't what you want, but they leave me no choice, he whispered to her before standing up. He handed the vial of whatever antidote he used to the active as he passed them by. Give this to the healers. They'll know what to do. Sean walked out of the cabin, feeling so furious he was afraid to lay his eyes on the idiots that let Evan simply pass them by and wander freely through camp. He simply passed everyone at the center of camp, straight to the leader's cabin. A few moments passed in silence, until shouting could be heard from the inside of the cabin. Only a few words could be made out amongst the enraged roars of the Alpha. Son of a bitch! He's dead! They're all dead! Every single one of them! Assassin's Camp. Avius understood his friend's concern and decided that it would be best to follow his leader's lead and ignore personal feelings and opinions for now. The pack needed loyalty and brotherhood now more than ever, and Avius would make sure that there was no doubt amongst their ranks. Suddenly alarms and shouts came from the camp, and as Sean stormed off, Avius followed his leader with his quarterstaff at the ready. After a short run, they reached the encampment, and immediately Avius noticed the dead man whom had once been the second in command of the clan. This could only mean one thing. Evan Banna. Sean thought exactly what Avius was thinking, because in the next second he was interrogating one of the actives on why on earth he let themselves be fooled by Evan again. Avius stayed clear of their conversation, but he did notice the bottles of booze lying close to the campfire, and he was filled with disgust. These actives had broken one of the pack's laws, and by doing so, also endangered the clan to Evan. Deal with these idiots for me, Sean suddenly ordered as he addressed Avius with his hand before running off towards his father's old workshop. A sinister frown was carved upon Avius's face beneath the cowl that concealed his mouth and nose as he looked over at the couple of those other actives that stood nearby. He nodded at them, and within a couple of seconds the men who had let Evan Banna slip past them and humiliate the clan by killing their second-in-command was on his knees before them. Avius started to walk around them as he pulled out 2 of the vials that held acid liquid from his belt. You all stand accused of crimes against the clan, and punishment must be delivered. The crimes are the following ones: drinking alcohol within the pack's perimeter, endangering the clan by not staying alert at all times, and being one of the reasons the former second-in-command Desmond is not with us today. Avius began as he circled the group of men who were bent down on their knees in the mud. These are hard accusations, my gentlemen, and the laws of the pack demands harsh punishment. I would even go so far as to say that you are all traitors, but I won't. Instead of having death or expulsion, pain will be the teacher for this day. Avius roared right after Sheen had walked past them. Avius threw the vials to the ground and began to wave with his right arm as if they were reaching to catch something in front of them. The actives all knew what was going to happen, and thus the ones who were being punished struggled desperately to get loose from their brethren's grip, but all in vain. From the burning ground to a large ray of fire rose, and just like a snake, it twisted its way up around Avius's right arm, leaving a long tail of fire behind it. Time seemed to stop altogether as Avius launched his right arm backwards, feeling how the warm whip of fire followed it and then swiped it forward as he aimed it towards the back of one of the actives who were on their knees. A terrible scream filled with pain erupted into the air as one could hear Sean roar from his cabin about what had happened. The instructor continued even when the actives screamed for mercy and promised they would never let anyone fool them again. He continued to swipe his burning whip of justice upon their backs. Their screams did not satisfy him, but it gave him a feeling of hope. Hope that these imbeciles would understand the reality of the situation. Avius suddenly stopped, and the snake-like whip of fire that had formed around his arm faded with the wind. He looked upon the actives before him and studied the many burned scars upon their bloody backs. It was a horrible sight to behold, even for the man who had cursed them. But deep inside Avius knew that this was the only lesson they would ever understand. Avius sighed heavily as he waved his hand towards the actives that had been holding the punished men to the ground. They all let go of their grip and backed away. "This is a lesson to you, to all of you," Avius explained as he addressed the entire camp, who had stopped to watch the event. "If Evan Bana or any of the other traitors ever step into this encampment again without being killed, I will personally have you all executed," he roared without any kind of control behind his words, as he turned his back towards everyone and made his way towards the leader's cabin. He entered it, slammed the door shut, and faced Sean. "I want the man dead, and I want him dead now." The desert. The ruins of Bright Vale. The leader listened carefully to the man in charge of this large company of mercenaries as he explained the situation to him. Some tea did sound nice to his ears, but that kind of luxury would have to wait for another time. However, it was a conversation that he was looking for and a way to get his message across one way or another. When the topic of food and something to drink made its way into the small talk they were having, the man turned to look at his companions. They all nodded and walked off with a couple of other mercenaries to get something to eat and drink. "Looks like we got another group of jokers and drunks here," Akita whispered and scanned the company of men and women around them. "You must feel like home." "Barca?" Ace grunted and didn't even bother to look over at his large and green friend who walked next to him with a big smile across his face. "Oh, I do indeed," the orc laughed and looked at the men and women around him who backed away from him as he continued to move on through the ruins. The masked man directed his attention back at the commander over these mercenaries and simply stared at them for a couple of short moments as he scanned them. It was rather easy to make out what kind of person the young man was and what his true intentions were. Fortunately, they didn't seem all too wrong to the masked man. Maybe a bit inappropriate, but still not wrong enough for the masked man to pull out his weapon or use lies to cover his true purpose. "Then let us withdraw to a more private area to discuss my business there. However, I'd wish for 2 more persons to join our conversation. Allison Blake and Crystal Rivers," he explained, and let his gaze wander off towards where Allison stood amongst the remaining crowd that had yet to leave, and followed the other 3 companions to the masked guy. New Haven. Patrolling the streets had become rather dull for Michael. He hated the armor, and whenever out of sight of superiors, would often find a place just outside of view of the knights to leave it, retrieving his cloak and wearing it until the end of his watch. He would often grumble in his own mind. Downgraded from general to foot patrol. How very humiliating. It's not as though any of those high-priced bellhops I used to work for were choir boys either, with their loving wives tending the home fires and their sultry girlfriends tending their other fires. And this fate, I once led an army, and now I am left to this, an armored saint. How very disgusting. Where's the killing associated with this life? What is the fun in running an organization so powerful if you don't use the power? This place is no better than Black Pond, except here there is no one looking for my head. He was broken from his thoughts by a young boy that came running up to him in a panic. "Sir, sir! Please, sir! Bandits are raiding my parents' shop. Please help them." Michael walked over to the boy as any knight, but instead of taking off in a run to the scene, he held a knife to the boy's throat with an evil yellow-toothed smile, and said very threateningly, "Don't ever call me by that title again. Do you understand? Just shake your head yes or no, and then point me in the direction and run along." The boy shook his head yes, of course, and then, with a very shaky finger, pointed to where the bandits were. Michael walked to them, the trail of his cloak catching the soft breeze that left its sweet caress over the city, the sun smiling even on this killer, this thug who was sometimes in knight's clothing. As he approached the men, he pulled a gold coin from his pouch and started thumping it off of his thumb and index finger, catching it into the palm of his hand. "Ah, gentlemen, greetings to you all. No, please don't break from your thievery." He then smiled devilishly, and his voice lowered to just over a growl as he said, "You're going to die for it anyways." With that, the first of the men dropped what he was attempting to steal and walked over to Michael. "And just what are you, sir, a knight or something?" the bandit said with his hands riding on his hips. "Never call me sir," he thundered as he drew the knife from his inside pocket of his cloak and slit the bandit's throat in one seamless motion. He then replaced the knife and looked to the other two men with arrogance, dripping from the next words as he spoke. "Come now, gentlemen, don't be shy. This will only hurt a moment." The next man came at Michael, wielding a large, heavy claymore. The first blow was a glancing slash that caught Michael in his shoulder. The second, a blow that sliced and scratched his stomach, as Michael still hadn't quite figured out the man's timing yet. It also didn't hurt that he was fighting unarmed at this point and offering no counterattack. "Damn," he thought. "This will be rough to explain to Master Yao once I return." This time a thrust came from the man's sword, and as he jumped back to avoid the strike, Michael now had what he needed to finish. Sloppy technique. The moron telegraphs each swing with his shoulders, and his eyes are always faced when he is going to strike. Time for him to get an idea of just what he's up against, Michael thought to himself. Another slash came, and this time it got nowhere near the former general, who dodged with the agility of a cat, avoiding the strike of a snake. As the man was bent over, trying to pick up his weapon once more, Michael quickly ran up and left a small parchment with a picture of a shadowed, black-colored, kneeling jester, its arms wrapped around the blade of a sword, and dripping a trail of black blood from the arms into a pool between its legs of the character of the collar. This was his calling card, and the move was so swift, the man never saw what Michael was wielding, and so his face took on a shocked look as he went to grab the throat. Michael wagged one finger side to side, and then said in a very cocky tone, "Not yet. I'm not done playing with you." By this time the second man had circled him from the back, and the man he had just taunted was so furious he ran at Michael, wielding his sword like a samurai warrior. Another deftly dodged blow, and the man that was behind Michael caught the blade in his head and fell like a stone. This time Michael took no chances. He pulled two knives from his coat and tumbled forward on the ground, slashing at the man's knees. As he fell to the ground, his sword dropped, and the man was screaming in agony. Michael stood and knocked the dirt off his shoulders. He threw one of his calling cards on the man that just died, and as he stood over the last man, he said with an evil laugh, "Temper, temper. I don't know why you get so angry. I'm going to give you a gift, my boy, of what I call a New Haven necktie. Allow me to demonstrate." With both his knives pulled, he slit the man's throat twice in the same place, and then cut out his tongue and left it hanging from the opening in his throat. The man, now laying lifeless on the ground, had Michael standing over him, saying, "You know, that look always slays them." After a very maniacal laugh, he very carefully placed the gold coin over each of the eyes of the dead men. Smirking, he said with a hiss of his tone, "Something for you boys to pay Death's ferryman with." Those parting words caused him to stroll casually back to where the knights were headquartered, stopping only to take off his coat and put it back in its hiding place. He then replaced each piece of armor, handling the clumsy gear as best as he could. Upon walking through the gates, he walked through the crowd of knights, without even so much of a second glance at most of them. It was clear he was not looking for friends, but merely a quiet place to rest his bones and sit for a while. And a place he found with a large roaring fire and a wooden chair not far away. Michael threw himself in the chair, causing it to rock back on two legs, very quiet, righting himself on all four. He then stretched out his legs and tucked his chin into his chest, apparently falling asleep.